The Tabletop Bellhop team is here to answer your gaming and game night questions. Tonight's question comes from one of our awesome Patreon patrons, Pax the Paladin, who writes, I just listened to a Ludology episode with Daniel Trudeau, which was great, and it gave me a question. What have you learned from doing game reviews about game criticism? Given your mission statement about making our game nights better, there's probably a lot of consumer guide in your practice of game criticism. Should you buy it or not? Is there more, though? Like thinking through and appreciating the game experience. What games would you say prompt a kind of review that doesn't boil down easily to thumbs up or thumbs down?
Well, I gotta say that is a fantastic question, Pax, and I think it's going to be an interesting conversation, as well as a chance for us to kind of explain our stance on some important topics when talking about game reviews. This is something that's kind of hitting the social media scene right now. There's a lot of people talking about board game reviewers and what they should and shouldn't do and what it entails and free copies and all that stuff. So we kind of want to, clear the floor and put out our stance on all of these things.
I have to say, though, our reviews never boil down to a simple thumbs up or thumbs down. There's a little bit more to it than that.
Yes.
And I have kind of wondered that because some review sites, some content creators are saying, this is a four-star game or a 5 out of 6 or whatever. And we don't do that. And I would be hard pressed to assign numbers to games because to me, it feels very apples and oranges. Like, unless it's all in the same category, how do you say this is a 5 game and this one's a 4? But they're two very different styles of games. So that's one thing that occurred to me when I was reading Pax's question.
Unless you're talking about Zensu, then we know it's a 5 game.
Yes.
It's a 10.
It's
a 10. Come on.
Yeah, it's a 10. And I will admit, we did kind of ignore the last part of the question tonight, unless we want to talk about it at the end. But like, what types of games boil down to being different types of reviews? Like, this was not a game recommendation episode. I would say we don't treat different games differently. All games we treat the same. So what we're talking about tonight pretty much appeals to any game we're going to review or talk about.
I think the honest truth is a really simple party game. We may play less times before we can form an opinion on it.
Yes.
Compared to a complex game. But other than that, we treat them all equally.
Yeah. And I would say none of our reviews boil down to thumbs up or thumbs down. Now, maybe when we first started up, we were a little more, this is positive, this is negative, but not anymore.
Well, game recommendations are kind of the bread and butter of the industry. These are the kind of questions that I really love. I say that when we do our group breakfasts as the Tabletop Bellhop team, it's often that we speak about ethics and such things related to the reviews we do in one manner or another.
Yeah, so to put this into context for the folks at home, the three of us go out for breakfast once or twice a month. And like Sean just said, this is the sort of esoteric thing we end up sitting around and debating for 2 hours while the waitress is going, you guys are still here? Okay.
As long as they keep bringing us coffee, we're not going to leave. They should know that by now. But yeah, this and other topics like, do you think our show's too long? Do you think it's too short? Do you think we should do this? Do you think we should do that? Or did you hear the latest controversy over this or that? And does that impact us? Do we want to talk about that? Do we want to make a statement about whatever issue is on hand? And I will say, for the most part, we do tend to stay away from the online debates, at least.
And I will say sometimes we're talking more about podcasting in general because Sean really gets into the techie side of stuff and likes listening to different content that's not just gaming. So we're sometimes talking about that stuff too. So we get into some interesting debates.
Yes, there is a strong difference between tabletop board game content creation and pretty much every other type of podcast out there, especially tech, right? Like it's very, very different, at least what people are putting out there. All right. So starting off, the first thing I learned, possibly always known, something that gets debated all the time, but I think is worth mentioning if you haven't internalized this, is that there is no such thing. This is a rare beast. It doesn't exist. It's a unicorn. And that's an unbiased review. That just don't exist. There are lots of different forms of biases, and some are going to apply. And honestly, I don't think that what the bias is, there's not a hierarchy of biases. There's some that I think are important that people need to acknowledge, and people need to be aware of. But the bias for one reason isn't, say, less of a bias or more of a bias than something else. Like every person reviewing games, you're sharing an opinion, and that opinion is going to be affected by outside influences. Now, the one that's going to make the most sense for people when you first start reviewing, and when we first start reviewing, when I ran the WGR back in 2002, or even just like telling my friends, hey, I played this game, I like it, are games I bought myself. The thing is, people are like, well, if you bought it, you're not biased. I'm like, yes, you are, because you spent money on that game, especially board games. Board games are not cheap. Some are extremely expensive. If I buy a $300 game, I'm going to have a bias there because I bought a $300 game and I spent $300. The amount of money I spend on that game could have been spent somewhere else. Maybe I could have bought 10 other games with that $300 game, or maybe it's just a really good night out in the town with Deanna where we're trying all kinds of craft beer and getting a fancy dinner and then going dancing afterwards. All of that money could have been spent elsewhere. Then there's the fact I had to find the game. Like I had to go to the local game store, or maybe, then I've done this, I went out to town to go pick up a game. I remember driving around trying to find specific games, driving all the way to London, Ontario, just to pick up something I couldn't get locally. Or I've called multiple stores, or I spent hours online doing research and then finally bought the game. All of that is going to affect how I feel about the game once I have it in my hands.
We were talking about this the other day with Marrakesh. You're like, Deanna, would you like Marrakesh as much if you had to go out and buy it? Because it's an expensive game. And wouldn't, maybe you're biased because we got it as a review copy. And I said, well, maybe I would be biased because I went out and spent that much money on the game and I would have had that pre-bias to like it. Having saved up and bought it, I'd be like, this is my $120 game. It's damn good.
Right.
So it goes both ways.
Yeah, the only real benefits of buying a game as a reviewer are, one, the PR people can't bug you. Now, that's actually kind of a big bonus sometimes, but yeah, they can't be constantly asking you, where's your content? Have you got that content out for us? And then two, you can speak to the purchase of the experience of purchasing that game. Like Mo was just talking about, having to run around because the game was hard to find in southwestern Ontario, and you might have had to go all the way to London or Toronto to find that game. We miss out on that, but that's about it. On the other side, we would need a lot more sponsors and patrons to be able to buy all of the games that we review currently. So to do that, to buy them, we would either need to review a lot less games, or we would become deeply beholden to sponsors and patrons and donations, which is a bias in and of itself.
I mean, if we hit the big time or I won the lotto tomorrow or something, I probably would buy more games just for that not having to be beholden to someone else.
Yeah.
And having those surprise due dates sprung on us, which is one of the parts that I least like about being a content creator, but I am not even going to get into that. So even just before you play the game, your experiences with it can give you a bias, like the experiences that I have at a con. And if someone's super engaging gives me a well-done overview of the game, I'm going to have a bias towards it going in compared to if I had only just read about it somewhere, picked it up on the shelf at the store, right? Or if I met the designer or the publisher and they were a fantastic human being in some fashion and we really connected, well, I can't help but kind of have a softness towards whatever they're producing, right? I'm going to go in with a bias there.
Now, another one, as far as free games go, what if you get a game as a gift? Well, now I have not the same biases because I haven't bought it. I haven't spent my money, but I'm going to have a bias based on the fact that I got this as a gift. And it's probably going to be impacted by who gave it to me and what I think of that person that gave it to me. And just the fact it is a gift. Now, I didn't have to earn the game or pay for it, but knowing the person who bought it is going to be sad if I don't enjoy it, it's going to play into my factor. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to want to enjoy this because I've wanted this game, or I'm going to try this out. And like that might get me to try a game I normally wouldn't because I'd be like, well, it was a gift. I got to at least try it out.
Yeah, honestly, reviewing gifts to me feels generally super cringy because you have to assume that the giver of the gift is going to be watching, listening, and it becomes almost a judgment on their ability to gift as a review, as well as a review of the game itself. I feel like there's just no winners there, short of, Mo and Dee giving each other gifts, because that's a different story. But if you get into, external family members and things like that.
I mean, Yeah, what would Christmas be if we weren't giving each other gifts for Christmas? That's pretty standard, right? And of course, those are going to end up being reviewed, at least informally, during the Bellhop's tabletop segment. I know it, right? So heck, the games we buy our kids end up getting reviewed. And I'm pretty sure your mom would be offended if we didn't review the games that she bought you as gifts.
Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with it, because I've been reviewing games I've gotten for birthdays and Christmases like for years. Like that's like my initial reviews. That's probably where they came from. And I guess it'd be different if the gift was like from a stranger or something like that. That might be a little different, or like someone you don't know that well versus an immediate family. But I don't see a problem reviewing a game as a gift. Like maybe I should be asking, like, hey, can I review this? Now, what I will point out is if you get a gift from, say, a publisher, that's a totally different thing. And that is a bias you had better declare. You better mention that one. Despite the fact it's a gift. It's kind of like a fancy way of saying a free review copy if you suddenly get a gift.
No,
so that one's a little interesting.
That's like tricksy, mess around with FCC type stuff. Let's not go there.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll get into review copies in a bit. We haven't gotten that far yet. I'm just talking about biases that has nothing to do with whether you're getting review copies on. And honestly, Deanna brought up playing at a con. Well, the same thing if I go to a public play game night, right? This could be one I'm hosting, someone else hosted, something at the local game store, a tournament, an actual play night, whatever it happens to be. Your biases for the game are going to include how much fun you had at the event, how good the lighting is, how comfortable you were, how good the teacher was, what I thought of the person who brought the game. Because I have had people try to introduce me to games that I don't necessarily enjoy their style of play. They're overly competitive, or they like to sit in silence and nothing social and focus on the game. That's going to affect my view of the game I'm playing. And then like ephemeral stuff, what I had to eat. The public play events I host are at a bar. So if I was drinking, that could go either way, whether I like a game more or less in my impression of it. And one that has happened to me, and I've had it happen to other people, is things are out of your control. Like the venue decides to close early, or the lighting goes all wonky. That can totally change your opinion of the game, and that's going to bias your review, which is part of the reason we try to play things more than once, but it's going to change that first impression of a game.
Yeah, like I thought Cartographers was pretty darn groovy until they turned the lights off at 9 p.m. and I couldn't read the cards. Yeah, this is the same thing I was alluding to with the convention experience. Like even just a regular old non-press, we're just there as normal people convention experience could color my bias towards a game. Like I mentioned the positive aspects earlier, but a bad experience with a non-welcoming demo volunteer could also put me right off a game and I'll just never want to play it.
Yeah, and I could cite two semi-specific examples without calling out exact companies or their demo team. But Deanna really doesn't like it when the demo staff throw the game. They very obviously intentionally make it so you win. And she doesn't like it when people tell her how to play, especially when they aren't telling the dudes at the table how to play. So then we get to the big one, the one that everyone wants to talk about. Everyone's talking about online recently, and that is the free review copy. I'm going to mention one right now before I get into some of the stuff I noted down here. Is free is not free. This is work. Reviewing games is not like this thing that just magically happens. There is a creative process that takes time. So a free review copy doesn't necessarily mean, boom, here you have nothing. You just now have a game in your collection. So I'm going to throw that out before I continue. So free review copies is the one everyone's talking about. And yes, there's a bias. And it's many of the ones I already mentioned.
I'm going to briefly touch on that whole it's not free thing, in that as content creators, we actually have to claim it as income. Yes. If someone gives us a game and they give us a $50 game, it's like we just got $50 in cash as far as the government is concerned.
In Canada, that is. I'm not sure if it's the same in the
US.
US.
I don't know U.S. tax law. I just know what I have to deal with.
Canadian tax law, yes. We have to declare our free copies. So a lot of the ones I already mentioned apply to a free review copy as well, right? Your lighting, where you're playing, who you're playing with, all that's still there. But you're going to have other ones, like, do I like the publisher? Am I worried about upsetting the publisher? Will my review affect my relationship with that publisher? What are other people in the industry going to think of my review? If I say something negative, is that going to be a bad thing? These are all biases that could interplay when getting a free review copy. The actual cost of the game. Was it a super big game they sent us? Did they send the deluxe version, or did they send the bare bones version? Did they include Kickstarter stretch goals with your version? All of that is going to give you a bias. And one of the things I do want to call out is when you do something with a publisher, other publishers will find out about it. If you don't know this, the industry do talk to each other, and they talk to each other a lot. This is not an isolated community of little islands that don't interact with each other.
Okay, so when we're talking about getting games for free from publishers, I'm going to go back. Okay, so just a little while back, Jamie Stegmaier of Stonemaier Games did this big survey of content creators. And then he published one of his nice chatty blog posts that he puts together. And he shared a bunch of stats as part of his findings from that survey. So I'm going to drop a bunch of those stats as we're talking tonight. And here's the first one. The vast majority of reviewers, 96%, receive at least some games for free from publishers. So whether they're disclosing or not, 96% are receiving free games from publishers.
That's insane. That's sorry, shouldn't use that term. That's bonkers. That's a ridiculous amount, which isn't surprising to me as someone who creates content. But that's most like just assume any reviewer, board game reviewer you're listening to is getting free copies somewhere. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily everything, but getting some.
Now, I hinted at this earlier, but one of the things that comes along with getting these free review copies from publishers is PR people. So even if you are sure, even if you are, absolute that there is no interference between the publisher and the editorial content being created, that doesn't mean you're not going to have someone poking you in the shoulder going, hey, where's our content? Hey, our Kickstarter goes live on October 12th. Hey, are we going to have it out on time? Hey, where's the video? Hey, you didn't do a video. You only did a blog post. Hey. A lot of that happens. There is a huge PR aspect within the board game industry. The publishers have, teams of people who are out there trying to make sure that content creators like us are getting content out there. And while a good content creator will either brush them off or know in advance and follow the rules, the bad ones may actually be biased and affected by the impact and rush that out for better or for worse. And that could impact the review as to having just, you got the game and you got to it in the pile and you played it and there's the game.
The honest truth is that some publishers or some PR people that rep them are way more enjoyable to work with than others. And when all other factors are equal, the game from the person we enjoy working with is probably going to receive more attention from us or receive it sooner. And that might be on a conscious or unconscious level. And by saying someone is enjoyable to work with, I'm not talking about them giving us cash or bribes or any of that. I just mean people that actually answer your emails and bother to share stuff and all of that. It can't help but color your opinion a bit, right? When you have a game from someone is going to value the work you do and work with you, you're going to put a little more effort into it.
And that may not actually be making it a more positive review or a more negative review, just more content. We may be more interested in tweeting a couple times more often or doing an extra, the unboxing that we might not have done for another content creator. That's the sort of thing that happens generally with those nicer people to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't mean I like the game more.
Now, just getting back to other biases, basic things that could come from something you bought, something a gift, something that showed up on your magic porch, something, a huge package you received, even paid content. When you played, how much sleep you had, who you played with, what temp it was, how comfortable your chairs are, what else you played recently, how long did it take, did it meet your expectations? We have multiple episodes talking about that now. Clickbait board games, for example, where you're expecting the game to be one thing and it's something totally different. That's like a preconceived bias before you sat down expecting one thing and then getting denied or lied to. And you're like, what? That's not what I thought I was getting out of this. That's a big one for us. And something we tend to bring up in our reviews when we're surprised by this. Now, sometimes they're pleasant surprises. Actually, to be fair, most of them, actually, the games still end up good. They're just not what we expect. But that is something that impacts it. Yeah,
I'm blanking on an example. But yes, we've definitely sat down at the table and went, okay, I have to rethink this. This actually is a good game, but I'm feeling grumpy right now because this is not at all what I was expecting. The one I was thinking about was when we played Electric Counts for the first time at the end of a very long convention day. And I was pretty sure it was one of the worst games I'd ever played in my life. And I was questioning why you'd agreed to review it because I was just miserable. And the next time I played it, it was at a coffee shop or out on date night, and I had a wildly differing opinion of that game.
So there's another bias actually right there. The reason I agreed to review that is because it said Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay on the cover. That was pretty much it. I knew nothing else about that game except that it was a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay card game. And I looked at the back and I saw, Carl Franz and Lumping Crooks Fighting Cooks and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm in.
So IP bias?
There was an IP bias there. So the point of all that is you're never going to get an unbiased game review. It doesn't exist. Now, the important thing is what we try to do, and I think most reviewers do, and they should be doing it if they don't, is calling out the explicit biases, the ones that matter the most. Now, I'm not going to get into exactly where that line is. That's up to each content creator to draw. And their fans are the ones that are probably going to be the big judge of if they've drawn that line at the right place.
Or
but mainly
the
these include existing relationships and collaborations. If you know someone, if you're friends with the game designer, if you meet them at cons every year, if they're sponsoring your podcast, endorsements need to be called out if it's an endorsement, a paid endorsement versus an unpaid piece of content. Review copies, of course, if it is a review copy, we call it out. And well, of course, if there's money changing hands, if it is paid content, if it's no longer a review, which we'll get into in a minute.
So you'll actually even notice on things like our Endeavor Deep Sea unboxing, we mention our sponsorship from Grand Gamers Guild, even though we got the game from a completely different company. Because Grand Gamers Guild is on the box of Endeavor Deep Sea, we need to call that out. Everyone needs to know that there is a relationship there, even though it may not directly impact how we got that game. Every bit of disclosure helps. You, the audience, should understand the relationships involved. Did you know that we have a review policy publicly available on our website? As a listener, I think you should know about it and read it. It's not just for publishers because it makes it clear where we as reviewers, content creators, stand. We talk about it in the abstract, but understanding how a site you follow reviews things is an important step to trusting those reviews.
I got another stat. It's not quite a stat because this one was inconclusive. So this is a quote from Jamie Stagmeyer's survey. If there is an overt bias, example, the reviewer is friends with the publisher designer, or if the reviewer has received money from the publisher in the past for other content, sponsorship, services, etc., the results are mixed. Some reviewers will abstain, others will disclose the bias, and others don't let their bias impact the products that they choose to review. So that's I guess there wasn't enough of a number there to assign a percentage to it. It's just kind of up in the air.
Well, those were the different options you could choose.
Right.
And there were kind of an even split.
Yeah.
Now, I totally disagree with the last one. No, you can't not let your bias impact the product you choose to review.
Right.
Like, unless you accept every review offer that comes in, no matter who it is, every time you get an email and they say, we want to send you a sample of the game, you say yes. That's about the only way.
Please do not do that, Mo.
Yeah,
please.
I don't recommend
you used
doing
to do that. Do not do that.
I don't see how the bias doesn't impact what you choose to review. I don't feel there's a legal need, possibly not even an ethical need, to call out this person paid us in the past or we had a previous relationship. That one's iffy.
I'm not sure. I think that's actually addressed somewhere in the FCC documents that it is a requirement. You have to say, these people paid me in the past. I have had a relationship with them where they have given me something. I'm pretty sure it's in there. I haven't read through it in a while, though.
But I've got to say, I've never heard a podcast who had a sponsor who doesn't have the same sponsor the next year go, well, next year, let's say Grand Gamers Guild, Mark decides he's cutting back on budget and doesn't sponsor our podcast next year. And we're talking about whatever, their latest game, Endeavor to the Moon. I don't think we go, and last year, Grand Gamers Guild was a sponsor of our podcast. That just seems extremely awkward.
I don't think we would. It seems like it would be awkward.
On the contrary, on the tech podcasts, that does happen all the time. If you're suddenly talking about some technology company, for Cisco, for instance, if Cisco was a former sponsor of the podcast, that gets mentioned.
Yeah. Okay.
And I suspect they're following FCC best practices, and I just think it's not an industry standard for gaming, and it would sound weird if we did it because it's not an industry standard. Should we technically be doing it?
I don't think this has come up for us ever at this point.
No.
The only other, like, to me, this seems excessive, is we could point out every time we got a review copy, the other review copies they sent previously, which we have kind of called out a couple times. Like we've said, yeah, they sent us this and the expansions. And then the review will be like, they sent us the base game along with these expansions, but not a lot of it. And the one that popped in my head is like Quiver Time has sponsored our podcast in the past, quite a few years ago. If we reviewed something new from Quiver Time, it would seem odd to me. So I'd probably just say, we've worked with Quiver Time in the past.
Yeah, that's probably it. And they weren't like, they sponsored us for 1 month. It's kind of more like they bought an ad slot. It didn't feel like a full-on.
But again, do you have to call that out?
Say they've worked with us in the past.
Yeah, we've worked with them in the past. Is all you need to say.
In the past would probably cover that.
Getting to that, because now we're talking about money changing hands. So first off, in my opinion, there is no such thing as a paid review. Reviews are opinion pieces. Once a review is paid for, it becomes a paid endorsement, an advertisement, or at best, advertainment. This is also true if the person asking you to review maintains creative control. If they have creative control, it is no longer an opinion piece. It's no longer just our words. At that point, I don't think you can call it a review. It is now a different piece of content. Once a publisher wants to review your review before you publish it, you're honestly crossing the line into that they now have creative control, and you have to disclose that they have creative control, and then it becomes an advertisement.
Yeah, no, I feel very strongly about this. I come from a background as a parenting blogger, and I have to say, as soon as a brand wants the right to pre-read my content before I publish it, or to start making editorial suggestions, then they are paying me, or I'm not doing it. And it is now a sponsored post. And that little line at the bottom where it says, all my words and opinions are my own, that's not there anymore, because this is now a sponsored post brought to you by.
Yeah, and this is actually something we just looked at, because while we have never allowed editorial control from publishers or other, anyone involved in giving us review copies or anything like that, I noticed when I was reading our own review policy that we hadn't actually explicitly said that. And I thought that it was something worth saying, because any journalistic venture worth being called a journalistic venture needs to have a wall between editorial and advertising. Writers must be free to write on topics without the threat of advertisers withholding or impacting their livelihood.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to when I was doing the parenting blogging thing, the best brands I worked with would be like, here's a bunch of our stuff. Do something with it. Otherwise, we're not going to keep giving you these things. And you'll have paid opportunities because you are doing this. But do what you want with it. Only do the things you enjoy. Just don't talk about the rest of it. Yeah. And I'm like, all right, I can deal with that. And when I'm saying that I sometimes gave people editorial control, trust me, for me, it was important that I was still only endorsing things I believed in. I know opinions may vary there. I guess that's an ethics thing for me. And like, whether I'm paid or not, I'm still not going to say this is really awesome unless I think it is. Like that's a morality thing.
Another term I hear a lot, I see this on Board Game Geek, I see it in various threads about board game reviewing, is that money is the difference between a review and a preview. And I don't agree with that one. I agree with the fact that once there's money involved, it's not a review, but I do think you can have previews that aren't paid. And I know there's kind of a general belief out there that as soon as a reviewer says the word preview, they're getting paid. It's now advertainment. It's now advertising. And well, there's proof of that, because we have a unpaid preview that'll be coming up with our review of Estate. Like, we have never taken money for our previews either.
We've always called them previews, because I don't want to say it's a review of Estate, because we are reviewing an unfinished prototype game. And if I say it's a review of Estate, you might get the wrong idea there. Mostly, can we still call it a preview, because it has become more prevalent that a preview is a paid thing, and are people going to assume we're paid as soon as we say preview? So, stat time. Apparently, it is exceptionally rare that publishers offer money to reviewers in exchange for a review. Only 4% said this happens many times.
It is good to hear.
Yeah. It is exceptionally rare that a reviewer requests money in exchange for the review. Only 2% said they do this many times. That should be 0.
It should be. I think in that case, once you're down to 2%, I think you possibly have amateurs who don't know better. Right?
So there's actually an interesting thing that has just happened recently. over September, August area time with Google, actually. So Google had a program where they gave influencers Pixel phones and said, talk about our phones, be like our phones, blah, blah, blah. Here, feature our phones in your videos. They weren't asking them to review them. They were just saying, hey, you guys are cool. Here's our phones. Make sure you use them and talk them up. They were basically saying, be previewers, be paid content sponsors of our content. But the contract issue, I mean, they were essentially giving away this free stuff for people to make videos with their phones. And it was shot down. I mean, it was, Google has backtracked. They have apologized, and they have completely shut down the PR team who was in charge of this program, because they were essentially asking, influencers, not reviewers, but influencers, to go out and wave their phone around. Because that's the problem we have right now, is the difference between a reviewer and an influencer is very gray.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, an influencer is a shill. They're a shill for a lot of different companies, a lot of different things, but they are essentially a shill because they are generally not following the journalistic ethics that we have been talking about throughout this whole thing so far. No
offense to any of your content creators who do follow that and choose to use the term influencer, because I do know many people in the board game industry that call themselves influencers.
That's true. So it's a tag, it's a name. It has connotations. There are people that are doing some dodgy things.
Yes, I won't deny that.
Yeah.
So now we've been talking money and paid content. So one of the things is, this issue with money is just about reviews. Reviews shouldn't be paid. There are other forms of board game content out there that can and honestly should be paid for. Things like actual plays, how to plays, actual endorsements, advertisements, sponsored content, new game announcements, press releases, all those kind of things. Like, I'm going to pay you to tweet about these games. Perfectly fine, as long as the person who's doing the tweets discloses they're getting paid to tweet about the game.
All right, stat time. Most reviewers who accept money for non-review content will avoid expressing their opinion. 17% differ, most with a disclaimer. So even those who will express an opinion mostly will use a disclaimer, is how I'm reading that. So
yeah. So what that's pointing out is if for anyone who's watched Rado or Rodney Smith and their how to play videos, they will not tell you their thoughts on the game. They just tell you how to play. You can go to Rodney Smith and try to get his opinion about a game. Good luck.
It becomes fact.
Very strong opinion on the fact that he produces educational content for games, paid educational content for games. He is not there to tell you if he likes the game, doesn't like the game, if he thinks it's fast, if it's slow. Literally as little opinion as possible, hopefully getting to zero. And again, this points out that 17% will add. Now, Rado will do his other videos where he will share in a separate video his thoughts. So I think that's where that 17% comes in, because then he'll disclose if he's like, I was paid to do a how to play for this game. Now here's my thoughts on that game. So some people do it. And then, well, we've mentioned it many times. The most important point here is disclosure, right? Like letting people know what those biases are. It should be painfully obvious to your fans what biases exist. You'll always hear us say, thank you, publisher, for providing us with a review copy at the start of a review. And I'll even call out if it's not. I'll be like, hey, I got this one for my birthday. Because again, that's different bias. I didn't have to buy the game. So that might impact my feeling on the game. If it's a $300 game, I didn't have to, feel that pain of spending that money. And if we picked it up ourselves, we'll tend to call it out. Like Deanna and I picked this one up at this local game store up in Chatham. We'll call these things out. And like Sean pointed out, even though Endeavor wasn't our review copy didn't come from Grand Gamers Guild, we called out that we have a relationship with Grand Gamers Guild.
And Grand Gamers Guild didn't even know we had that game.
No. I'm actually surprised Mark didn't give me a copy. I'd be like, oh, I already got that one.
All right, stat time. Most reviewers, 90%, openly disclose in their content if they receive the product for free.
This is an FCC requirement, which applies to Americans. Interestingly, we were discussing earlier this week, it doesn't actually apply to Canadians, but the companies involved can be affected. So while we may not legally be impacted by the FCC's rules, the companies we work with are. So by us not expressing and disclosing properly, that could impact the companies in America who are influenced by those rules. And so it helps everyone if everyone just follows those rules.
There's Canadian rules too. I just can't remember what they're called right now.
Yeah,
and they're
CRCC's
very
got
similar.
stuff.
So in general, I just bother to follow the FCC rules because 99% of who we're working with is American companies.
Yes.
And I figure that covers all their bases.
And
Now,
to be fair, if you start getting into the UK and the EU, they're even more restrictive over there. You better be disclosing. You will get shut down as a content creator if you don't disclose. Now, interestingly, that disclosure could just be a little hashtag ad up here in the corner of our video that we don't even have to point to. They do have different rules on how you have to do it, but you do have to disclose everything over there, which is interesting.
Now, interestingly, one thing we've been talking about is how publishers might or might not influence content creators. While going back to that discussion I had about influencers and influencers versus reviewers, we are now in a weird state in the world where influencers can actually impact and affect the publishers to some degree. While the board game industry is smaller, there are still content creators out there who have enough clout to be able to throw their weight around in a negative and improper way should they ever choose to. Now, I'm not saying anyone does. I'm not making any claims. I'm just saying that the possibility exists. And I want to take something, completely outside of the board game. If, for instance, Mr. Beast, one of the largest content creator influencers in the world, were to go to a game company like Grand Gamers Guild, who's a couple of people, a couple of people in a small office, that would be influential and towards the publisher. If Mr. Beast said, "Hey, Mark, we want to do something with your games. Give us all your games right now," it would be hard for Grand Gamers Guild to easily say no because, well, Mr. Beast is Mr. Beast. And I think we all know the sort of clout and influence that he could bring to a product if he so chose to. And so you've got that sort of reverse influence happening.
Because what I want to get into next is our kind of process, how we review games, what we think is important to cover.
I'm going to very quickly say that because I have been doing this for 14 years in some format or another, watching the way that disclosure and the ethics behind this have developed has been very interesting, but I'm not going to segue and go off on it, but I could talk about it in a ranty way for a long while. No, we should get into the crux of Pax's question about how we review games.
Maybe Pax and D can get a thread going on the Discord.
Maybe we'll do a patron only. Deanna talks influencer marketing in board games or something of that sort. For anyone who's listened to our reviews, you're going to know most of this already, but the way we review games is a focus on what the game looks and feels like, with the component quality and the presentation. That's what we always start off with. We start off with the basic facts of it plays this many people. Here's who published it. Here's where we can get it, right? That is kind of a given. We do like to call out the designer, where possible the artist. Sometimes we even throw in a developer there. That's something I think is important because there's a lot of people behind the scenes in the board game industry that don't always get the recognition they do. So I'm going to kind of throw that in first. So once we got the basic facts, it's a 3 to 5 player card game by this publisher. We get into, like I said, what the component quality, right? The presentation, iconography, how good the rule book reads, some kind of general overview. Then we get into what the game plays like. This is, to me, one of the more important parts of it, which generally includes an overview of play. Now, over the years, we've shifted from a detailed, almost how to play level of detail in the game to what I'm trying to do is an overview of play that's detailed enough for people to be able to tell if it's your kind of game. For you to go, oh, it's got this mechanic. I recognize, I like that mechanic. Or, oh, that sounds fascinating to me before. I've never heard it before. So that's more what the focus is on now. We want people to be able to tell if it's their kind of game. And then at the very end, the last thing we do, which is sometimes the largest segment, is our thoughts on the game. Now, that first part's pretty straightforward, right? Like we cover the game. We go the facts. Here are the facts. Here's how the game looks, right? This is where we're trying not to interject much opinion. Though every now and then we'll throw in a little comment along with some of the facts. But the next thing we are going to do, the second part, the last bit, where we're sharing our thoughts in the game, I think is worth expanding on. And that is that we will share our personal feelings about the game. But the big thing that we like to bring to the table is the impressions we get from other people we play with. I'll call out if my family enjoys it, if my girls enjoyed it, if my mother-in-law liked it. I'll mention if my gamer friends liked it, back when we used to have a regular game night here. I'll mention if it's gone well at public play events. We are going to call out specific things people liked and didn't like. We really got into that with Panda Royale last week when we were talking about it. Now, that was kind of after the review where we were talking about how different groups reacted to the game based on the different player counts. Now, we're always going to try to highlight the good and the bad, but with an explanation. We're never going to say this game's too random, I don't like it. Like, that's just not our review style. I'm going to say, you know what? This mechanic I found very random. You know what? The deck of cards was so thick. There were so many copies of the cards. I had no idea what could be coming up. It just felt purely random, and it was just too random to me. I didn't feel like I had enough control. I couldn't plan ahead because I didn't know what was going to happen. That's more something we will say. We'll call it that one specific mechanic. But then we'll expand to say things who might like that, because there's certain things we don't like in some games that other people will enjoy. So we might be like, hey, the randomness in this was a downplay to me. I want my games to be more perfect information and strategic. But you know what? Randomness is really good for leveling the playing field. When you have players of different skill level, randomness gives those players that aren't as skilled or don't have as much system mastery a chance to learn the game and play better and have a chance of still winning. So for family game night, maybe that randomness is appreciated. So that's just kind of vague examples without mentioning specific games.
And it's interesting because we have spent a lot of time talking about how much of the game, of the mechanics, of the play do we put into the reviews. And it's changed a lot. If you go back to our early reviews, you can follow a path of shifting quantity and sort of specificity how much the game. We always said this isn't to teach, it's a review, but we were getting pretty close to teaching some games.
Yeah, we had
more
to
of a disclaimer in case we got something wrong.
We had to rein Mo in. There was some heated debates there.
Yeah. But the fact that there are three of us in front of the camera now is one thing, because we're all different gamers. But there's also three more immediate family members right there behind Mo and Dee all the time in our reviews, as well as friends all around Windsor who, even if they don't always know it, are part of the input we use to develop our reviews.
Yeah.
And then there's things like, Mo loves Dex games. I can enjoy some Dex games. Dee kind of hates them. Dee adores that deep strategy, the SATs in board game format level of thinking. Whereas I prefer generally a more lightweight, casual game. I like a game where I can be chatting with people and enjoying time socially as I play a game. So while these aren't the only things we love, the only kind of games we love, they are part of our biases and the thought processes that go into our reviews and why our reviews are broad due to it.
Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to one of the stats I had pegged to say later because it really fits well here. Most reviewers, 78%, will accept tabletop products for review, even if they include genres, themes, and mechanisms that they don't typically enjoy. But the thing here is, Sean was talking about the different types of games that we like. By having three of us, we kind of cover our bases by there being a wide variety of games that do fit into something one of us will enjoy, for one thing. But we do a lot of pre-vetting to make sure that the games we're getting kind of lean towards things we would enjoy, and we don't just say yes to everything. That's a big factor too. And I think maybe that 78% just comes from how widely varied the field is and how many new people there are to it. And I think that first year when we were first doing this, you said yes to anything. You were so excited someone wanted us to work with them that vetting process, it was a much higher bar that people, now they got a limbo, okay? But it was a much higher bar. So we were saying yes to things that we found we didn't enjoy, and we've kind of figured out not to do that.
Well, and I think part of that goes to another part of our review aspect, which is the amount of play that we put into games. We don't just play a game once and then review it. We talk about it after we play it once. We don't review it after we've played it once. Whereas if you are willing to accept anything, if you're willing to just take all comers, you get to a point where you don't have the time to play something five times and review it because your stack of games that are coming in every week doesn't allow you the time. And so that allows us to be more particular about what we get. Right. Why would we want to spend time playing over and over again, the latest pimple popper game when we aren't going to enjoy it? It's not going to be something that we review positively. So why not, get the game that will?
I would almost say the first part of our review process is doing that due diligence to figure out if we even want to take the game or not.
Yes. What we do try to do in our reviews is point out what we liked and didn't like, what we think other people will like and won't. And specifically, we'll tend to call out things where if you like this mechanic, you'll like it in this, or if you like this style of game, or if you like this theme, or if you like this game type, you won't. And then the final part of our reviews, and I think this is the most important thing we do, in my opinion. This is my feeling. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone should call us out on this. But we always finish off by recommending the game to different groups, potentially calling out groups that should avoid the game. The recommendation is often, if you don't like this, don't buy this game. Don't look at this. Though we'll usually be a little generous and say, but give it a try because maybe you'll like it. Because there are a lot of really good games out there that we review and we're like, man, even if you don't like trick taking, you should give this one a shot. We do tend to do that quite a bit. And this includes more than mechanics, right? We'll talk about the tone, how it feels, how it makes you think, if it feels like an interesting logic puzzle. We'll try to call those things out, not just necessarily pure mechanics.
And I'm going to be honest and say I couldn't pull this off. It is kind of like your special skill to be able to go, this game is also like X and Y. And if you've ever played Z, you're going to love it. It's you have that synthesis of knowledge. That's why you get to be the tabletop bellhop. But
that's why I get that.
Yeah. And our goal is always being to match people up with the right games for them. Not the right games for us, but the right games for them, because not every game is for everyone, and that's an awesome thing.
Now, one of the things, kind of getting back to what we were talking about there when we kind of went off track for a bit, is we, as part of our due diligence to be able to recommend the games to different groups, is we have to play it with different groups, right? Like it's not just the synthesis knowledge because I played all these games, because I want to try it with different people. Every game we play, we try to try with different groups of players. We try to play them at different player counts. We'll try the solo mode. If there's a solo mode in the game, we will play the games multiple times. And honestly, a new one that's new to us. And I don't know what's going to happen when she goes to university, but right now we actually have like an extra voice in the mix because Gwen now runs the board game club at her high school. And she comes home after every event and tells me what they played and what people liked and what they didn't like. And I'll recommend games for her to play. I'll be like, oh, try bringing this one out, see how it goes. And sometimes they're total flops with her demographic and age group and the people that come out to her game nights. And other games are extremely popular. There is a game that we have debated even calling a game that is actually one of the most popular games from that group. So to me, that's actually a big part of our due diligence in being able to recommend games for different groups, is to try them with different groups. Now, no, we can't try them with everyone. And no, I don't know, a group that only plays family games and a group that only plays heavy games and a group, and I bring the game around to all of those. That's just not feasible. But we try to get it played with as many different groups as we can before we talk about it within a reasonable time limit. Right? Yes, I could hold every game in our pile until we play them 10 times each with 10 different groups at every possible player. It's not that. To me, there's a line there. In some games, you can play them once or twice and realize the whole game. Other games, a good example is Hamburg. You got to play it 10 times, 8 times, 9 times to fully explore the game to get a really good feel for it.
And that developed over time, that we realized that was a key component to be able to give a fair review.
And one thing that this also helps with, not just getting a better feel for the game and who it works for and who it doesn't, but playing it those extra times helps with mistakes. Mm-hmm. And we all know that you're going to play a game extreme sometimes. We talk about it all the times. But if you're only playing that game once before you review it, or even twice, how do you know that those aren't your extreme plays? We have seen reviewers who have ranted about some aspect of a game and how it ruined the game for them, except we knew that they had played that part of the game wrong. They had made a mistake, and their review of the game was biased by the fact that they didn't play by the rules. Mm-hmm. And so playing it those extra times has allowed us on some occasions to go, oh, wait, this is our third time playing the game, and we just realized that this one mechanic we got backwards. We need to do something different. And to be fair, there have been times where even after 5 games, when reading the rule book as we write the review, because we do double check things and check the rule books as we're writing the reviews, we go, oh, hold on.
We've actually put a pause on a review because we need to go back and play this again because we weren't even playing it right.
Yeah, there's been a couple Wednesday morning, Tuesday night, one more plays just to see how things feel differently. That's definitely happened. Now I'm going to go to something Sean was calling about PR companies pushing you and creative control from publishers. One thing I would like to hear where a publisher, I do want them to reach out to us is if we make a rule mistake. If we point out something that is factually wrong about your game, please tell us. And then we will offer an apology in our next episode.
Fact checking? Yes. Fact checking and telling me I screwed something up, by all means, is very much different than telling me my opinion is incorrect.
Yes. Don't write to us and say, you made dumb decisions or you did not play this correctly because you didn't follow the scripted, or you played this totally wrong. And I point out to you, well, that's not in the rule book. That's a little different. But yeah, please call us out on actual mistakes. Now, another feature of our content, something that I feel strongly about, is that we are not a board game hype show. We are not focused on reviewing the new hotness as soon as it comes out and only talking about the hottest games. One of the main reasons for that is there are a bunch of other people who are really good at that, and I'll let them have that niche. Feel free, have fun. There's lots of you out there. Good luck to you. Thank you for letting me know about what games I should be hyped about. Yes, sometimes we get hyped about a game, and we'll talk about it early. Our review of King's Coalition is a good example of that. We saw the game at Gamma. We saw it at Origins. It looked fantastic. We asked for a review copy. We brought it home. We reviewed it. And then it wasn't until I went to throw in an affiliate link, and I'm like, oh, this game's not out yet. Okay. So it was kind of a surprise for us, but that's happened a couple times. It's not often that we talk about games that are brand new. Most of the games we're reviewing are months, if not years old sometimes. Now, one of the things I like about that is it lets me see if a game has staying power. Like if it's 6 months later, are people still talking about whatever game it is? It'll be interesting to see with King's Coalition because it's one we did put out content early, or other game, right? Like, are people still talking about this? And even more so, I love discovering that hidden gem, that great game that it seems like people missed. And usually we can kind of do the research to figure out that, you know what? That came out at the same time the Kenner Spiel Awards were awarded and everyone else was looking at over here. And it seems like they missed this game. I always enjoy that part.
And one other nice thing about doing games that have been out for a little while is it lets us avoid that PR problem we were talking about earlier. Yeah. You don't have a PR manager going, hey, when's your content coming out? When's your content? If the game's been already on the shelf for 2 years.
Now, this one thing I want to talk about, and this kind of goes with what games we select. We kind of talked about this a little bit already, but one of the things is only saying nice things and overall positive reviews. Now, our reviews do tend to be overly positive. Overall, not overly, sorry, overall positive. Most of our reviews are positive because we try to focus on facts about the game, first of all, before sharing an opinion. And once that's done, our thoughts are our own. Now, we're not afraid to say something negative. And honestly, like when I saw some of the discourse going around right now about this, I had never even considered the fact that saying something bad about a game may mean the publisher won't work with us anymore. And honestly, I got to say, if that's the publisher that we're working with, I don't think I want to work with them anyway. If that's their attitude, that if you say something bad about my game, I don't want to work with you. To me, that would be a total disservice to our friends and fans if we just sugarcoated everything. Like then we're getting into pandering and advertainment that we're not getting paid for. I don't know.
There are some content creators out there that are overly negative and ranty and sort of clickbaity in that way. And maybe as a publisher, I'd be like, maybe that's not someone I want to work with. That's about, I can see that.
Okay, that's a little different.
Yeah. All right. Stop time. If a reviewer plays a game they intended to review but doesn't like it, responses are varied. Many will proceed with the review. 62% would go ahead and review it,
Yep.
or contact the publisher with questions. 20%. Well, some will choose not to create a review at all. 20%. I'm going to say we've done all three.
Yeah,
Yeah.
though not as much anymore. Anymore, I'm much towards the just publish the review.
We have asked questions.
There used to be a
Definitely.
time where I would reach out and ask questions, but then I think it was a conversation we had over breakfast with Sean, where it pointed out not everyone has access to the designer to be able to contact them. Because we have that relationship, that privilege, we can answer those questions. We really should be reviewing the game based on what the person who bought it off the shelf gets. Now, we often will talk about going on Board Game Geek. Now, that's something people can do. We do look at FAQs. We do check for the latest version of the rules. We look for errata. But very seldom will I reach out to a designer anymore to look for clarification. It does happen.
If we're getting answers from the designer or publisher, and that makes the game great and more playable and enjoyable for us, that's not the experience that the normal person's going to be having. So we're not giving them a fair review. Yeah.
And as for choosing not to create a review, that has happened very seldom. And I got to say, those games were bad. Like, they have to be pretty bad when we get to that point. And in that case, we did reach out to the people and say, I can publish this if you want, but this is going to be ridiculously negative. Like, these are games that were unplayable as presented. You don't want my review to be, this is unplayable, don't buy it.
I've got another stat here. Sorry. Only a small number of reviewers, 4%, are very worried about expressing negative opinions, and that will lead to fewer publishers sending them products for review. However, at least 44% are at least a little worried about this.
Yeah, see, that's sad.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Now, that being said, most of our reviews are positive and sometimes overwhelmingly so. But that's not because we're being nice. Trust me. There are more than a few games out there that at least one of us has not enjoyed and said as much. Dragon Dice. But we very carefully vet the games we're taking to review. We do not say yes to every review opportunity, and we often turn down games we just don't think we would enjoy. We have developed connections with enough people in the industry that we will never be hurting for content. Because of the breadth of games we have access to, why wouldn't we focus on the ones that seem to be most fun and exciting to us and the people who have chosen to follow us because of the games that we like and talk about? We could absolutely review the dozens of card-based be rude to each other at a party games that are coming out constantly, but that wouldn't help us, the publishers, or our audience.
Yeah, and this is the one mainly from Jamie's poll where people were saying that this is a bad thing, that the reviewers like us who do this isn't good, that we shouldn't only be reviewing games we want to play and that we're excited about, that we think we're going to enjoy. And I got to say, I was shocked by how high that number was, but more surprised by the number of people saying that reviewers should be doing this, that we should be reviewing games we don't think we'd like. And that by saying that a game isn't for us and we didn't enjoy it makes us less biased, which I don't understand it. Like to me, don't you want to hear the games we're excited about, the stuff we're enjoying playing? Or you want to hear about the game that we didn't think we were going to like as much, but it ended up being really good? Or the game that we thought was going to be awesome just wasn't quite there. Like, it's good, but it just wasn't as good as we're thinking. That's what we tend to talk about. I just don't get it. Like, I don't understand why any content creator, unless you're just like fishing for free games or you're just like hurting for content, you have nothing to talk about. I have to assume most of these people have their own game collection they could be reviewing. This would be a good thing.
Now, I will say we have gone up to publishers when we're meeting with them in person at Origins and said, surprise me, hand me something that I wouldn't grab on my own that you're excited about. And we have been pleasantly surprised by games we would not have picked on our own.
Yeah, so that tends to be certain specific publishers whose games have surprised us. I'll call it out, okay? We're not really party game people. But I would go to the Op or Smirk and Dagger and say, what's your hottest party game right now? Because I'm not a party game player. They know the party game market. And you're probably going to give me something that it ends up either I will enjoy, or even more so, our public play events, it'll go over really well.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that we sort of could get into here is when you're talking about publishers. So if there's an indie publisher with 4 games out there and we've reviewed one of their games and we turned down the other 4, fine, not a big deal.
Yep.
But if let's take Stonemaier Games, for instance, because Jamie Stegmaier's name has come up often here. If Stonemaier Games has a active catalog right now of say 30 games, and we have reviewed 20 Stonemaier games and we've loved them all, but we haven't reviewed 5 absolute turds that may exist in the catalog. And I don't know all of Jamie's games, so I'm totally making these numbers up. But we have, perhaps unintentionally, indicated that the catalog of Stonemaier games is all fantastic. It's all rainbows. Everything we've ever touched from Stonemaier is fantastic. When he might have some games out there that just would completely fall flat if we were to review them.
But you know what? I'm going to say with the sheer number of games that come out every year from the larger publishers, we couldn't possibly review them all for one. So I think maybe that sheer number balances that.
And for some games like the Op, I agree. And the really small ones are sort of small enough, but there's that mid-range where, and I think Stonemaier probably falls into that mid-range games who aren't putting out a ton of games every year. They're putting out maybe 5 games a year total, and keeping an active back catalog, which is important, in that sort of concept. There's a mid-range where it could happen, and I'm not saying it does, but that was when I thought about this concept of maybe we should review games we don't like. It was that specific niche of publishers where we may have only reviewed good stuff and made it appear that their catalog might be perfect when it in fact might not be.
Yeah.
Now, I will point out, we have called out publishers by saying I have yet to play a bad game by them. We have said that about Daily Magic games. We've said that about Thunderworks games. We've said that about our sponsor, again, which
does that imply we're cherry picking only their good games?
But to be fair, we kind of picked Mark as a sponsor because we really enjoyed his games.
Yes, so we liked his games.
And to be fair, I don't actually like Tir na nog. You guys love it. You guys like it. It doesn't work for me.
It was one of my favorite games of the year. I just think they have a weird way of marketing it. But that's
I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it the Op because you brought them up, and we said we weren't going to mention names this episode. Oh well. They publish a ton of games. I have absolutely zero negative feelings about. I will admit.
Yep.
They're called the Op, which is short for USA Opoly, because they got famous for putting out themed versions of Monopoly. Like that's where the Op comes from. They have an entire catalog that I ignore. I'm like, those are those games from the Op. So I don't know. Is there due diligence? I guess by saying we enjoy every Daily Magic game, should we seek out the rest of them to try them all? I don't know. I get it that there are people out there that don't trust reviewers and only say positive things. Mm-hmm. And there is the tendency, especially when you first start reviewing, to not want to say anything bad. Because you're just getting started. You don't want a bad rep. You don't want to be that person who's bad-mouthing people, unless you're one of those people, which we kind of brought up earlier. We're not fans. We're not fans of the clickbait. But we've been around for 5 years. Like, we've done a few negative reviews. I can point you to them if you want to hear us be negative. But I now vet what we get. Like, why would I review a game that I'm not interested in playing?
And if you're listening to our reviews, you will hear myself or Sean often say, this one wasn't for me.
Yeah, because
doesn't mean it's a bad game. My daughter loved it. It's great to play with my family, but I will never play this by myself. That's for sure.
Yeah, as the Bellhop, I tend to get the final vet on which games we take. So though now and then I'm like, Deanna picked this one. This one wasn't me. So that has come up. So I don't know. Maybe something we can do. If this is an issue. And I would love to hear from you fans. Mo at Tabletop Bellhop, join our Discord, reply to our newsletter, whatever. There's lots of ways you can contact us. There's like a contact us button probably on our webpage. Let us know. But maybe we let our patrons pick one game a month to review. And whatever it is, we review it. We reach out to the publisher. If that doesn't work, we buy the game, whatever that happens to be. Maybe that would throw in that.
Do you know why I haven't wanted to do that in the past? But if it was a poll, it would work. But I'm like, I know some people have a level where they're like, you can tell me what game to review. I just feel like it's a really cheap and sort of weird way for people, for smaller publishers to purchase paid reviews. Like there's some weirdness there, right? Like if
you
small
cannot
indie,
recommend any of your own games. We'll just put
yes,
that as a rule.
but having I spend a lot of time on Patreon looking at what other people are doing, and as written, to me, some of them seemed a little like, this is a way you could just go pay to get your stuff reviewed, and I don't like it.
I wonder if that's actually happening. But anyway,
I don't know if it's actually happening. That's a different thing. But I'm like, I saw the possibility for problems there.
All right.
Anyway,
I'm just expecting our patrons to get angry at us and make us review Cards Against Humanity.
I'll review that.
Why would you say that out loud?
But I'll review that. That one's easy. You'll get to hear us say negative things about a game.
Yeah, there we go.
And a company. And
all right. Now,
so one of the questions that did come up in our chat room, and I just want to make sure we covered it all, was Pax, who originally asked the question. So it's always awesome when the person who asked us a question is in the chat room and we're discussing it. That just feels awesome. Probably feels just good on the other end. So that's awesome. But one of the things they talk about in the community of movie reviewers is plot summary or recap versus analysis. So it's the whole explaining the gameplay. And I think a lot about this during our reviews, because she thinks a lot about this. Okay, I'm quoting. I think a lot about this during your reviews. You have to make some hard decisions about what details are relevant and what belong in the review, striking a balance between too little and too much. And well, that is the big thing that's changed. That is I start typing and I'd like rewrite rule books. It's in my head. It's how it flows out of my head. Maybe it has something to do with the fact I can remember the rules to thousands of games. It's just how it flows out of me is I'm like, you do this, then you do this, and you get these cards, and you put this here, and you count this to 3, and then you go over here, and you put this flag down, and you do this, and you do this. Meanwhile, that could be said by, well, every round you take up to 3 different actions. One allows you to place flags, one allows you to draw cards, one allows you to do that. Like, that's the difference, right? Where I want to do that, there are 4 possible actions. These actions include. I almost think like I should get into rewriting rule books sometimes because I tend to be more succinct in the written rule book, but still a little too specific in our review. So the big thing, like I said, and I think I mentioned this earlier, but just in case it didn't, was my goal is for you to listen to the review and kind of like be able to picture the game in your head, like to understand the mechanics that are happening, the flow. Which is why in a lot of our reviews we'll say, okay, that was just a lot of words to say, you do this, then this to get this. And we'll often sum up at the end of the actual rule review. One of us will say, what all that means is you're drafting a resource to be able to play cards. And when you play cards, you get a bonus and you're trying to match scoring cards. So we'll try to throw that in there because that's what I want to get across. I want to get across here are the mechanics of this game. And if you like those kind of mechanics, you'll enjoy this game.
Where we're talking about the balance, we was heavily debated. We were talking about paring it back. And we wanted to just remove it. And Mo said we can't because when I'm listening to a game review, I want to understand how the game plays, to understand the theme, the mechanics, understand if I'm going to like the game or not. Yeah, and you were going on about how that's a critical part for you as a listener of content to understand the game. So we have to have that minimum amount in there and trying to find the balance of what is a minimal amount to explain the gameplay without turning into a written version of Rado runs through it.
Yes. All right. Do either of you two have anything more to add?
You all just got to hear one of our breakfast rants, basically.
Yeah, this is literally what we have talked about any number of times, sitting over a Greeklish breakfast.
Yes. So, hope that answered your question, Pax. I hope that gave everyone a bit of a look behind the scenes at reviewing board games, what people do. Because like BML, thank you, Jamie, for happening. Though to be fair, that's part of what inspired this topic. Like there was a cause and effect there. But starting up the conversation about this, and I thank you for giving us the chance to get out our opinion on it. I think this is a great way to talk about the consideration that goes into doing reviews and how we try to be critical. And part of that is admitting our biases. And I will still stand by the fact that reviews should not be paid and every review is biased. You can't get away from that.
Disclosure. Very,
Yes.
very important on a legal, moral, ethical disclose. God darn
Yeah,
it.
not
do
just
it.
because it's an FTC requirement.
So how about you guys? Do you have anything to add to the conversation? What are your thoughts about board game critique? What do you wish you saw more reviewers do? Is there anything that we can do to make our reviews more useful to you? Leave a comment wherever you heard or watch this. Hit us up on social media or start up a conversation on the Tabletop Bellhop Discord.